The Caucasian lady, my first recollection is of passing away. At 4 years old, I was strolling with my mother to church as we held hands. She had on a blue skirt with a pattern of pears and red cherries on it, along with high heels. I yanked out of my mother's hand and raced out into the street as we were walking because I noticed a park across the street, complete with a swing set and slide. And I decided I wanted to be there. My mom cried out and rushed towards me, but it was already too late. A big gray vehicle raced around the corner as I was halfway across the street. Remained calm. I was not included in it. Mom and I were on opposite sides of the vehicle as it veered and slammed on its brakes, coming to a halt. I had enough of a lead now that this barrier was in her way to go on running into the park as I ran under one of the park's enormous elm trees. The desired swing set became closer with each little stride, but I was deaf to her cries, which were now filled with rage instead of deadly dread. And then, as abruptly as I had taken off, I fell to the ground, bringing my Sunday best ruined by mud and grass stains as I skidded to an ungainly stop. Someone was chasing me. My pals gave a raucous shout from below. I had been the reigning champion in time tag for the whole summer, but Zach was gaining ground quickly, so my crown was in danger. There were only the two of us left playing, and my wristwatch's timer indicated that I had 23 seconds remaining to avoid him. But why had I climbed this foolish tree? I wondered myself as I scraped my knee against the bark. I also had other questions, such as, who am I? Mom disappeared where? Why have I grown so much since then? We ascended more and farther. Zach was so close to touching me. 14 seconds. I slid down one branch. Trying to make it to a neighboring one, rather, my shoe slid on a slick wood patch, and I fell. The weight dropped out of my stomach faster than the rest of me. I had no idea I had gotten that high. I struck the ground with an unappealing crunch rather than a thump. Upon landing on my back, I suddenly felt like my ribs were breaking. Nothing hurt, only a strange, strong constriction in my chest that felt like a big serpent squeezing me. My parents could not afford to take me to the hospital, so I was going to have to go. How could I have made such a mistake if I don't die right now? I think hazily that my dad is going to unalive me. I had a hazy memory of my pals congregating about me in adoration, and of the swing off to the side, swaying in the summer air. A high-pitched buzzer punctured the quiet like a knife as my consciousness returned to reality, letting me know that I was still the reigning champion of time tag. I woke up under the enormous elm's shadow, completely bewildered. Shouts arose, and as I opened my eyes, I saw my mother fleeing, barefoot in her high heels, as the driver of the gray vehicle approached me. She pulled off her shoes as soon as she got to me and held my face in both of her hands. "How are you doing?" She spoke in a really frenzied tone. "How did things turn out for you?" I replied that I had tripped, because, well, it seemed right, I guess, to be honest. I didn't know what had happened to me. It was too much for me to absorb it all. She released her breath quickly and held my head on her breast. She replied, "Don't you ever do it again, no, Mom?" I answered. I had never died before. It would not be the last one. The things you don't consider when you're 8 years old are incredible. I recalled well the bizarre and horrible experience I'd had on that misguided walk to church, even though I'd never told anybody about it. And I was always cautioned, as were all the other kids in the community, of the risks involved with tree climbing. The grown-ups gladly used the tragic story of Quayne Pleasance, a local child who had fallen from a tree years before, as a warning, though, for some reason, I had not yet connected the apparent dots between these two events. It wouldn't stay that way for very long. It was 2009 summertime. I was strolling down Main Street in Swiss Knife with my best buddy Caden. Although I haven't lived there in more over 10 years, I still consider Swiss Knife to be my hometown. It is called after the Swiss Knife River. Before you ask, I'm not an encyclopedia, so I can't tell you how that river earned its name, but you could ask. The point is, we had just left a showing of a movie at the Sticky Shoe, our town's dollar theater, as it was lovingly called by everybody. You don't need to know the origin of the name. The roadway was warm since it was July, We were thrilled since the movie had been terrific, however. There was a cold feeling of unease that lingered unsaid between us. My mother had started to make vague references to the fact that she and I may not be living in Swiss Knife for very long, since the last few months had been quite difficult for them. My dad, on the other hand, had stopped talking to me, or for that matter, just glance at me. I wouldn't realize until years later that there was a carnival of betrayal and resentment between the two of them. All I knew then was that there would not be much longer to these summer days of Swiss Knife with Caden and the sticky shoe. And so they were tinged with a feeling of urgency that at times bordered on disastrous. However, on this particular July day, the fear was subdued as my closest buddy and I walked up Main Street and engaged in enthusiastic conversation about the film we had just seen. No, when was the most awesome part? Caden then shuddered fiercely and came to a complete halt. "Whoa," he said, chuckling a little. I had the craziest chills right now. I turned to start answering. It's really odd, which is strange. And before I could utter anything outside of my head, I found myself on a whole other planet. In that scenario, a gorgeous adolescent girl would be at my side instead of Caden. A universe where my freckles and pale skin had been replaced with tanned, lean muscle on my forearm, and where I was considerably taller, the attractive girl was laughing happily while holding my arm. It was early autumn, and nip lingered in the night air in Swiss Knife, on the same stretch of Main Street that Caden and I had just been strolling. Apart from several individuals who had left our town's recently opened Cinema 6, a movie theater, earlier than us, the street was mostly deserted. What, however, was the rush? Everything else didn't matter since I was with my closest friend, Sadie. Intriguingly, I had never met Sadie before, and I thought the phrase best girl seemed strange. Was I referring to my girlfriend? And why did both of us have on outfits that seemed like they belonged in my grandparents' old picture albums? Only a few seconds before I saw it, I felt it. A feeling of discomfort, as if there was a serious issue that I was unsure about. And suddenly headlights from the other side of the road started to swerve in our direction. I was unable to see the driver's face since they were so bright. All I could see was the automobile, a big, new Chevy that may have been sold as an antique by the summer of 2009 with unimaginable power. The automobile slammed me and Sadie before slamming into the outside wall of the pizza business behind us. I felt stuck in the middle. There was hardly any discomfort. Sadie was nowhere to be seen. The last thing I saw of her was a canary yellow sneaker flying off to the left. I smelled fuel and pizza. I worried half-heartedly whether I would be too wounded to participate in the homecoming game. The next weekend, as my head sagged down on the bent hood of the Chevy and my eyesight became fuzzy. Hey dude, awaken! Main Street was where I was. My head was bounding violently. Caden was kneeling beside me, giving me a shoulder shake. With my hand at the back of my head, I Saturday up and completely opened my eyes. What took place? I inquired with wide eyes. Caden answered, I don't know. You seem to have fainted. You took a blow to the head. I laughed, my eyes hurting from the tears, not simply from what I'd just witnessed, but also from the anguish, maybe to stop me from sobbing. Caden offered, let's go to my house, since it had been so awful and genuine. Otter pops are here, my mom's mother, my grandmother, dropped by 3 nights later that day. I recall thinking it was weird that Dad had moved into a hotel room, since hotels were someplace you stayed when you traveled to Disneyland and other places like that. Grandma came over to assist Mom since she was sobbing a lot, and she lived nearby, although I knew my mother well enough not to inquire too much. I was perplexed by the whole sad situation. However, there was an additional matter I had been inquiring about. I asked Grandma at supper, I take it you've lived here your whole life, in the Swiss Alps? Yes, from about the age of 14, yes, she responded. I've been here ever since my father got a manufacturing job the summer after I finished 8th school. Excuse me, Mr. Wilford, down the street. You know old Buck, for a year while Daddy was constructing the new home, we leased out his basement. It would have been 57, no 58, or oh. Was it hell? Mine has changed from what it was. This response aligned with all the previous explanations I'd heard her give about her history, where she would address not just the question you posed, but also 5 ones you didn't, concluding with bemoaning the fact that her intellect simply wasn't what it once was. Has anybody on Main Street ever been struck by a car? I inquired by the sticky shoe long ago. She answered, her eyes bright with nostalgia. Oh, yes, horrible item. It was Sadie Prentice and that guy she was dating. You know, naturally at the time it wasn't her last name. Instead it was, hell anyway, struck by some tourist, drunk off his butt. My mom said, interrupting. Yes, he was. Grandma continued angrily, destroyed himself. The idiot. And that football player as well, there on the roadway, dead center, of course. You've seen what happened to poor Sadie, she said, pointing at me. I stared at Grandma, not understanding. Mom said to me, Mrs. Prentice from the church. My eyes widened. Mrs. Prentice, whose wheelchair had, for as long as I can remember, been parked in our church's aisle every Sunday. Was that her? I recognized the attractive girl on my arm. Puzzle pieces that I had no idea existed were quickly coming together within my head. Why are you bringing up such a ridiculous issue right now? Mama inquired. I gave a curt shake of my head, half in reply, half to forget the sound Quinn Pleasance's ribs had made as they had broken through his lungs. I responded weakly, no reason. Could you kindly pass the corn? I never told Kate about what had occurred to me that day on Main Street. After 3 weeks, Mom and I relocated, so it's not like I had many opportunities to.